Good morning. My name is Mark Noriega. I'm with Accenture here in Sacramento. I work with a large team here in Sacramento working on many of the state projects, covered California, Fiscal, licensing at Breeze, as well as the local government at the LA County with LRS and C4. We're also doing some work in the city and county of San Francisco. So I myself have been here for the last 20 years working with the state of California. So I'm happy to see a lot of familiar faces, and I'm really excited about this morning's session because it is a culmination of the state coming from 20 years ago to where we are now, to really starting to take advantage of the data explosion that's occurring and using those data insights to really help deliver better services to the Californians that we all serve here. So thank you for coming. We've got a great session here today to talk about data plus design and our approach and how you leverage data to enhance the value and insights that you get from it. Not just because you want to do it, but because it's good for California citizens. So we're going to have a conversation here, and this is to be interactive, so we look forward to your questions, and we will get this thing going. A couple of things I would like to mention is that very few people up to date have been able to get the return on investment that they put into their data strategies. The old business intelligence warehouse, data warehouses of old no longer deliver what they expected, and I would argue that in some cases may never have, right? We put up these big data warehouses, and the reporting that we get, while it helps, it doesn't give us that forward-thinking view. And so I think today with the technologies and the approaches that are being brought to the market, I think we're going to be able to take better advantage of that. Things like machine learning, data science, new models, human service design, all of that is going to drive where we go with data and how good we are at delivering service to the Californians that we serve. At this point, I would like to invite the panel. I've got a panel of experts, my colleagues from Accenture here. Directly to my left, John Froehlich. They will give quick bios of themselves when they take over at this point. Next to him, Steve Boswell leads our Fjord studio in San Francisco, human-centered design studio, world-renowned, and really helps deliver that human-centric approach to our team here. And we have Manish Dasaur, whom you all met this morning. If you weren't at the keynote, he really got us started thinking on how we move this agenda forward. So at this point, I would like to have each of our panelists give a little bit of background, and we'll go from there.
Great.
Of themselves.
Great. Thanks, Mark, and good morning, everybody. It's great to be here. How are you doing this morning? That's pretty good. Okay, great. Well, as Mark said, my name is John Froehlich. I'm a managing director at Accenture out of our San Francisco office, and I lead analytics strategy for health and public services in our firm, and specifically focus on our clients in the Western region. So California being sort of the core of that, and then pretty much up and down the coast. I come out of the private sector health provider business, so I'm a recovering hospital administrator by training, so worked for a number of years in large healthcare systems. I still do a lot of work with both our payer and provider clients in terms of how do we pivot to the new, in terms of leveraging all of this technology. And as we're going to focus this morning, I think we'll talk a lot about what it means to do this in a design thinking kind of way, and I'm really honored to have Steve here to my left. He'll really help us with that. But you know, a lot of us have always felt that whatever we're doing in analytics really needs to be business driven, and so much of it has always been, well, we have some cool data, let's see what we can do with it, as opposed to thinking about what's the business problem I'm really trying to solve. And you know, and let's not be limited by structures and technology, and now more than ever before that really is coming true. So
absolutely,
looking forward to the discussion. Steve?
Great.
I'm Steve Boswell. I'm the group director for Fjord, based out of San Francisco. I'm responsible for all of the design and innovation work that happens within the NorCal region. I have a long background, interestingly enough, in data. I used to work for a company called Barclays Global Investors in San Francisco back in the day in their global market data group. I also have an extensive history working in agile software teams and now applying all of that with a design lens. So I'm really interested to talk to all of you today about how to leverage those insights in meaningful ways, but ultimately at the end of the day, what I'm gonna remind everyone about throughout this entire conversation is it's all about the people that we're serving. And we have to keep that in mind with everything that we do.
Well, good morning, everyone, once again. Manish Dasaur, I'm a managing director within Accenture Digital. I specialize in analytics. I lead our North America practice in our visualization technologies. So I'm looking forward to talking to you guys about how capabilities in that space are now able to drive a visually compelling experience that is design focused, and looking forward to the discussion.
So I'm going to go ahead and kick this off with a couple of questions, but by no means is this for me to ask all the questions. We're really looking for the audience to take advantage of having these experts up here and answering your questions. But I'll go ahead and get this kicked off. And our first question that we would like to pose to the panel here is, if you could, and maybe Steve, we start with you on this, right? Please describe what design plus data means. You see the screen to your left that kind of talks about some of the concept, but you know, what does this mean to you and why is this important?
Yeah, so we've realized over the past few years in the design industry that the way we typically do a design project is to go talk to humans and observe humans in their environments and understand what they're doing to get through their days. And that's great, but it kind of reminds us, what we're realizing is it reminds us of that adage that Henry Ford said, which is, if I ask people what they want, they would tell me they want a faster horse. And so what we're realizing is through that design process, that's a lot of times the outcome that we see if we're just taking that human-centered approach. So what we're trying to do at Fjord is say, hold on a second, there's a wealth of information at our fingertips in most organizations that we should also be interviewing. So we call it interviewing the data. And so we're trying to come at it from both angles, where we talk to humans to understand the context of their daily lives and how they're interacting with technology. But then we're also trying to leverage the data in ways to uncover insights that actually they haven't thought about. So our ultimate goal is to create services that live and evolve over time and exceed what the user ever thought was possible. And so that's really what we're trying to do when we bring both data and design together. So when we run programs now, we have a very cross-functional team. So a lot of times at Fjord, we'll talk about people are the new API. So everyone, I think, in the room is technologically savvy enough to understand the notion of an API. And if you're not, we can have a side conversation about that. But what we realize is that in organizations, you need to leverage your humans as your APIs because they have a lot more information in the context to make that information relevant. And so what we recommend is that you do cross-functional teams. And this is the way we run our design programs, is we have a data scientist. We have a data designer, is what we're calling them, that is part of our design team along with interaction designers, technologists, visual designers, strategists, et cetera, so that we have a cross-functional team that's looking at the problem space from all those various angles.
Manish, would you like to add something to that?
Yeah, I mean, you know, when I think about this, the phrase that comes to mind is drowning in data and thirsty for information, right? And I think that's really what it is. There's a lot of data out there. There's lots of systems that are now getting good at aggregating, storing, modeling that data. But I still think the bridge from taking it from data and making it truly actionable, insightful information that a consumer can take action on is really what this is all about. It's about designing the interaction with the human in a way that data becomes a tool, an empowering tool for them to do their job. And that's why I think it's so critical that we're all having this discussion today.
John?
Yeah, I just build on one theme, Steve, that you brought up, and when you gave the, faster horse example.
Yeah.
One way to avoid that is to think about the outcome you want, which is I
Absolutely.
want to get from point A to point B faster. And take it needs to be a horse out of it, right?
Yeah,
so,
exactly.
so that, and that's one of the things I think is powerful about this design-led approach is you say to the people who are interacting with citizens, so what is it that you're trying to get to have happen here? What would be a good outcome, both in terms of result, but also the experience, the way. So I would like, I'd like to be able to identify folks who are at risk to not meet their child support requirements,
Yep.
but I'd like to do it in a way that's non-threatening or non-combative or whatever. So it's both a desired result or outcome as well as sort of an experience in getting to that
Yeah,
outcome, right?
absolutely. Yep.
One of the things that comes to mind, and why I'm very encouraged here in California is this is happening right here within the state of California. One of my other colleagues is sitting in the back, Mr. Dan Boswell, another managing director with our firm. And over at Covered California, they're actually taking these concepts to build out a new user experience for the applicants of healthcare through the Covered California portal. And they're leveraging the Fjord concepts of human-centered design and informing themselves with the stakeholders, the APIs, as you put it, the human APIs, to really give them insight as to how they make this better, right? And this is not a once-and-done effort, right? So as you think about your programs within the state of California, and many of you have already got very mature data programs, it's a journey that we are all on, and so we need to take advantage of that. But there are amongst you, your colleagues within the state government and local government, quite honestly, we're seeing lots of RFPs for this. We were recently awarded some work over at Energy Commission for an analytics strategy. There's water analytics going on at Operations Agency. So lots of work going on and lots of help for you to get some of these insights. So it's exciting. I guess one of the things that I would ask the panel is, what are those key success factors that organizations need to have to not only build an effective information management strategy, but also build one that's sustainable, right? Starting when you're excited and getting it going is always fun. But it's once it gets going, how do you make sure that it sustains itself as you put these new approaches or new cultural changes within the organization? And maybe, John, you want to take a whack at that first?
Sure, I'll get it started. So, you used the word right there, which is, how do I begin to make this my culture? An observation I would make right now, people are rushing to wrap the new technologies around their existing business to try and sort of shore up their business by becoming more digital. The question you really need to ask is, how do you become digital at the core? How do you say, that is the core of my business, and what does that mean in terms of how I serve the people that I serve? So this whole idea of culture change, it means having, fierce advocates at the top of the organization. It means having the ability to listen aggressively to your customers, and to have ways for that to inform and drive sort of your mission and what you do. So I would, I'll start just with a very sort of squishy stuff, but it's that whole culture change and not trying to be a more digital business, but trying to be digital at the core.
Yeah, and I would say, I would maybe one up your listen aggressively, and I would say co-create with your users. Nice. I think that's really important. What we find in design is that most people are smart enough to figure out all the workarounds they need for a given piece of technology. And that's usually what informs the next changes to that technology, is how people are working around the constraints that are inherent within that. So one of the things that we will highly recommend is that you have sessions with your users where you're actually co-creating with them. And you're having concepts that are generated by the folks using the systems, or even the people that benefit from the use of the system. And making sure, again, that you're putting the end result of citizen services in this context at the core of everything that you're doing. And the other thing that is really interesting in the work that we do is, typically when we get engaged with a client, it's the beginning of a journey. So this notion of you have a discrete program that's 4 to 6 months long, and that you end it here and then you're done and everything changes, is a fundamental fallacy that everyone needs to just get rid of. Because if you are serious about a digital transformation, it's an ongoing process, and it's constantly evolving, and the notion of those long engagements where everything changes at the end of them is wrong. It's an ongoing thing that you just constantly have to adapt to over time.
Yeah, 2 points come to mind. We talked about it in the keynote, right? Simple is hard. And I think taking the time to design a user interface that is easy to understand, that's intuitive to understand, is challenging. but I think it's certainly worth the time and worth the effort. And if you do it in a way where you're co-creating, like Steve said, I think it makes it even more fruitful for your users, right? So I encourage you guys to think about that. The other thing I think about is the concept of the feedback loop, right? Of pushing out your data analysis capabilities, pushing out your visualization capabilities often and frequently, using the new delivery models that we talked about this morning, and using them to generate feedback from your user base. And that feedback can be used to improve not only your data engines, your algorithms that calculate and store the data, but also the way you disseminate that data across, right? So I think simple is hard, but taking time to do that, and also establishing that feedback loop is going to go quite a long way. And I see where clients get it right. Those are two things that they've established, and to your point, keep it going on a continuous journey.
You know, there's been a lot of talk in this arena about the technology and how quickly it's moving and the expansion of data. But what I also know is that the technology, as advanced and as quick as it's moving, in many cases is the easy part of the work that we do here in government. So it begs the next question, and then I'll open it up to the floor for questions, is, you know, what are organizations doing that are succeeding in this endeavor to address the issue of governance, right? We talked a little bit about in the keynote about privacy, and that we've got to rethink about what we think about security and privacy. Many cases, you know, and I've been involved in several efforts to show how sharing of data might work amongst programs, even within the same agency, but we've also tried it to go to the local government as partners in this. And while the technology is ready and available for you to take advantage of it, there is still the issue of governance and how you share data and getting those agreements in place such that your legal entities and the business entities and statutes, some of them real, some of them just imagined in some cases because that's the way we've always done it. How do you deal with the issue of governance? Because that to me is as big a part of this, because we have a finite set of data within one organization, but the real value comes from getting data from several organizations to really get to correlations that are going to change the lives of people we serve.
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
I think that the answer to that really is as simple. You need to create a model similar to like NIMS or SIMS or any of those fire department uses or police uses now as part with the incident command above, and work out from there branches and you know, different sectors and things like that, and build that into your policy and procedures, so that your policy and procedures create they handle everybody at all four, and that way you can always grow from that situation any direction you want to go, because you can always add branches to the core or sectors to the core, no matter what, no matter how far you go.
Yeah, I would add to what you're saying. So I think that's an excellent model to think about, an incident command, where what we recommend is that you'll establish design principles that are important to adhere to ensure that you're keeping the end user in mind, right? So as you go through a journey like that, there will be these core principles. That one of them is, like, we talk a lot at Fjord about creepy versus cool. So especially in data, it's really important that you don't cross that line like so many companies have already done. I mean, I think of Target and we sent the pregnancy coupons to the dad of the teenage girl that was pregnant before anyone knew she was pregnant. So that's creepy. And that's the things that we have to, those are kind of the principles that we need to make sure we maintain. And so as part of that principle process, there has to be a governing body of some sort. But again, it goes back to the people are your API. So it needs to be a cross-functional team. Because what we find a lot of times is when we are pushing the boundaries, the first card that always gets played is, well, legal and compliance won't sign off on this. And there's just an assumption that they're just not going to come on board. But what we find is once we involve them in the conversation, we involve them in the co-creation, they see why we're recommending what we're recommending and that it's going to be good for the end user, they will typically work with you to figure out a way around that is compliant but still delivering on that service.
Yeah, I'll add to that one. And I think a lot of times when I hear questions and concerns about security and governance, a lot of times they're just emotional questions and concerns. They're questions based on the fact that we've never done it that way before. And everything that we're doing in digital and technology space, I want you guys to think about yourselves as pioneers. This is groundbreaking. You are shifting the way we've done things. So of course you've never done it that way before. By design, you've never done it that way before. So as a result of that, it is going to require us to rethink about the policy, rethink about our legal requirements, rethink about those components that go along with a transformation like this. And just because that could be hard, or just because we've never done it that way before, does not mean we shouldn't do it now. Right? So I think pushing the agenda there, despite the perceived hurdles, it behooves us all to do that, right? And to Steve's point, if you can bring them into the conversation, they can help you work through those emotional boundaries and get to truly what you can and cannot do. I think you'll be surprised and find that you're actually able to do a lot more than you previously thought you were not able to do.
I'd like to come at the question from just a slightly different angle, which is around this concept of data ownership. So our old governance language, we talk about data owners, data stewards, right? And we had this mindset, if I'm the place where the data is created, I own it, I get to say what gets done with it.
Right.
And the insidious one is I only worry about its fitness for purpose for the thing I want to do, rather than having sort of this broader mindset, which is other people are interested in data that I may be at the center of creating, and it needs to be fit for the purposes of what they're trying to do with it, as well as what I'm trying to do with it. So moving from the this is my data to this is our data mentality, that's part of the culture of a data-driven organization, but it's also a whole different mindset that we need to start teaching to the people who are at the point of origin of the information, that kind of thing.